The morning was promising, with the summer sun shining outside and the scent of flowers wafting in from the open window. Despite it being a weekday, the young beauty didn't need to rush anywhere. Yesterday, Noelle quit her job as an administrator at a fashionable cafe where she had been working for 3 years. She did so not of her own volition, but at the request of her fiancé, the son of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in their town. Noelle's father was against her decision. "It's wrong of you, daughter, to not appreciate the work that you had," he said. "If you're not going to work there, then where are you going to go? We don't live in a city, and it's hard to find a good job here. You worked so hard to get this position, and what's next? Are you going to sit at home and depend on your husband's handouts? And here, though you were paid not much money, it was your own money." But the daughter reassured her father, saying, "Kevin will figure something out. He'll place me somewhere in their company. I'll be doing paperwork, and I won't be idle. Plus, he doesn't want me to work at the cafe and embarrass his family. Imagine his father's business partners come over, and I'm there working as a waitress in front of them. They'll be ashamed of me." Noelle's father was angry and exclaimed, "You're a foolish girl. You don't understand. They're interfering in your life. And you're not even their daughter-in-law yet. What's next? Will they start counting how many calories you've eaten, for example? What if you get fat and embarrass them? And by the way, your father is a former prisoner. They certainly won't want to let me in as their son's father-in-law. But sorry, I can't change who I am and erase the shameful stain from my life. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched. We don't even know how they've earned their wealth. It's possible to buy a house in Spain with a factory salary. Remember, daughter, if something has arrived, it means somewhere has departed. An old and immutable truth." "Oh, that's it. I can't talk about your philosophy too much." Noelle kissed her father on the forehead and left the house. She had a lot to prepare for the wedding, because it was not far off. Noelle stepped out into the sunny day. The girl was at that beautiful age when everything around her seemed cheerful and was painted in bright colours. Noelle grew up as a sociable, kind girl, despite never knowing a mother's love. Her mother died in childbirth without having time to legalise her relationship with Noelle's father because he got into prison. So, the girl only met him in person at the age of 10. Since then, Michael had tried to protect his daughter from all the vicissitudes of fate, fending off any troubles from her. After talking to her father, Noelle went to the most prestigious wedding dress salon. She picked out several beautiful options that were brought to her in the fitting room. The bridal salon was considered the most luxurious in the city, so the fitting room was like a big room with a comfortable couch, table, and a small podium with tall mirrors nearby. This way, the bride could see herself from all angles. And while Noelle was trying on another dress and admiring herself in the mirror, she unwillingly overheard the 2 saleswomen talking behind closed doors. They didn't choose words with their dialogue, as they didn't think anyone was there. "Did you hear the news?" one of the girls said. "Kevin Rifkin is getting married. Can you imagine?" "No way," the other exclaimed, as if she had heard of some miracle. "And who caught him? They say he's quite the ladies' man. Won't miss a single skirt." Well, for young fans of free restaurants and seekers of rich foods, this will be the biggest loss of losses. How many girls has he seduced with a luxurious dinner and a free vacation at the seaside? It's impossible to count. "I wonder," whispered the second woman, "who did he choose as a wife? Probably someone just as wealthy, or maybe his parents chose a suitable match for him." "No," objected the first saleswoman. "They say she's just an ordinary girl who works as a waitress in some cafe. Kevin saw her and was struck by her beauty. Good for her, she snagged a rich guy. Apparently, she wanted more than just a fancy dinner and a nice vacation. She knows her worth. They say his ex-girlfriend was furious when she found out he was marrying a commoner. Well, she must be a real beauty, said the second woman, since he fell so hard that he's even marrying her. Lucky her. But one thing's for sure, all she wants from him is money, because Kevin Rifkin doesn't shine with beauty or intelligence. Well, what did you expect? Replied the other. Someone has to be good-looking in the family, and someone has to earn the money. A man doesn't have to be handsome. A man should be a provider. Oh, well, what kind of provider is he? Retorted the conversationalist. He lives off his parents, and he is only listed in the company on paper. They say his deputy does everything for him. This Kevin doesn't know what it's like to rent an apartment or pay for food. Everything he has is from his daddy's gifts. He's the only one in the company who has a position by birthright, not by talent or hard work. I feel sorry for his fiancée. She doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. Money talks, and this is a typical marriage of convenience. The senior saleswoman, helping Noelle try on a dress, suddenly noticed that she was listening to the conversation of the girls behind the door. Therefore, she went out to them and sternly reprimanded them, making them keep their tongues in check. I'm not getting married for money. Noelle wanted to scream, but she held back, realizing that the scandal could reach the groom's parents, and then nothing good would come of it. They were the kind of people who treasured their family's reputation. All the festive mood had vanished, and Noelle decided not to buy a wedding dress, at least not now and not in this salon. When she came out of the fitting room with a stony face, she scrutinized the saleswomen, who were smiling at her as if nothing had happened. However, they were surprised and disappointed when Noelle did not buy the expensive dress she had chosen, which cost a fortune. Do you get paid from the sales, right? The bride-to-be asked the chatty girls. What a pity. I'll go to another salon where people don't gossip. The senior saleswoman, who had hoped for a fat check, realized that the two gossipers had ruined everything and scolded them. Why did you gossip here? Is there not enough work for you? The customer listened to your gossip and she got upset. And what if she tells other customers that the brides are being gossiped about here? We'll go bankrupt like this. The frightened consultants scattered to their own tasks. Meanwhile, Noelle, feeling upset, wandered along the street. Is everything said true, she wondered. My Kevin isn't like that. But the surname Rifkin was mentioned. No, I am not going to ruin my wedding because of the silly gossip. Then the girl remembered that today she was going to choose a festive cake and went to the confectionery. Although Kevin's family had hired 2 specialists to organize the wedding, Noelle still wanted to choose her wedding cake herself. The confectionery offered her different options for this dessert, and she chose a tall 5-tiered cake decorated with fruit and berries, and on top it was decided to place mini copies of the bride and groom made of marzipan. After finishing with this, Noelle decided to have a snack and went to the cafe where she used to work. The waiters welcomed her warmly, and the chefs decided to compliment her with a lemon strudel. Only one woman, who worked as an accountant in the establishment, was not as pleased as everyone else. Noelle, the woman addressed the girl, taking her aside. Are you sure about this guy? Does he really love you? What do his parents say? I'm worried about you. You grew up without a mother and had no one to teach you practical wisdom. Don't worry, Mrs. Collette, Noelle reassured her. Kevin loves me very much, and his parents are good to me. The wedding is in a week, and I've already ordered a cake and almost picked out a dress. Listen, Noelle, I've never told you this before, but your mum and I used to be friends. Your mum was getting ready for her wedding too, and she brought a dress. Since she lived in a dormitory and had no place to store the wedding dress, your mum gave it to my parents for safekeeping. It's still hanging in their closet, wrapped in a case. If you want it, I'll give it to you." "Oh my goodness, of course I want it," exclaimed a delighted Noelle. "I want to see Mummy's dress." "Okay, come back after my shift and I'll give it to you," said the accountant, smiling. 3 hours later, Noelle and Mrs. Collett arrived at her parents' house. When they entered, Mrs. Collett's mother, sitting by the window, was surprised to see Noelle. "Chloe, you're here. How are you doing?" she asked. "Mum, this is not Chloe, but her daughter. Her name is Noelle," Mrs. Collett corrected the elderly woman. "Oh, sure, but she looks like her," she said, clasping her hands to her chest. Mrs. Collett took out a dress. It was made of fine, expensive material and was embroidered with crystals. The fabric had not darkened or deteriorated in any way over time, and the stones shone like new. Noelle noticed that the style suited her very well, both in size and taste. Not for nothing, they say, that fashion is cyclical. So the dress was at the peak of today's fashion, and Noelle was thrilled. It was what she had been looking for, but could never find. Thanking her former colleague and her mother's friend, Noelle took the dress and flew home, as if on wings, to please her father and show him her find. "Dad, look what I have!" exclaimed the girl as she ran home. "This is Mum's dress. Mrs. Collett gave it to me. Imagine, they used to be friends." "Anne Collett?" asked Noelle's father. "I remember her. Yes, she used to be firm friends with your mother, but back then she married and went to another town." "I know, she told me. Well, look what she gave me." Noelle unfolded the dress to show her father. "This is Mum's dress that she never had the chance to wear to your wedding." Michael was thunderstruck. It was the first time he had seen his bride's dress. Tears rolled down his face. He remembered everything, how happy they were, how they were preparing for the celebration. "Dad, don't cry. Everything is fine," Noelle consoled him. "This beautiful dress will see the world finally, and Mum's dream will come true. Only instead of her, I will wear it. Just imagine, it fits me just right." When Noelle put on the dress and showed her father its beauty, he suddenly realized that this was the last week he would spend with his daughter. A heavy sadness shadowed his face, not because Noelle would be getting married and leaving the family, but because he did not trust Kevin, her fiancé. Noelle's father was a good judge of character. Meanwhile, the closer the wedding day approached, the more Kevin doubted the correctness of his choice. His friends kept adding fuel to the fire. "You're only 25, they said. "Look, there are so many more fish in the sea, and you choose some flounder." "Noelle is not a flounder," answered the groom, trying to calm himself. "I chose her, and now she's my bride. Show some respect, or I won't invite you to the wedding." "Come on, we want what's best for you," said Kevin's buddies, who were also the same daddy's boys as Kevin. "It's just a pity that you're leaving our bachelor parties. The wedding ring will put you to the ground." "I'm not going to die, I'm only getting married, but I'm not going to leave our parties," Kevin parried, but his doubts were growing like a snowball. Kevin tried not to listen to his friends. However, his heart always sank when he passed by some beauty with a luxurious figure and a frank look. Nevertheless, he always took himself in hand. He remembered Noelle and prepared for their upcoming wedding. Being in a state of frustration and doubt, the guy did not find support from his own parents either. "Son," his worried mother said, "have you changed your mind about getting married? I don't want to say anything bad about your girlfriend, but she's not your equal. She's too simple and tasteless. She doesn't even know how to behave at the table. She doesn't use a knife, and she doesn't know which fork is for the salad. And her clothes, I was shocked when Noelle came to meet us in her white blouse with creepy roses. Then I thought, is she going to be my daughter-in-law?" "Well, honey, you're exaggerating," the father interjected. "The blouse was decent. Yes, the girl is good. She looks up to Kevin and will obey us. You won't get any surprises from her, except for a couple of grandchildren." But her father worries me. He's been in jail for 10 years. Doesn't that bother you? How am I going to tell my partners that my daughter-in-law's father was a convict? Half the investors would turn their backs on me. I didn't think Kevin would go this far. Is she pregnant? She's not pregnant, snapped Kevin. I thought I was really in love with her, and now I begin to doubt whether Noelle was suitable for my future life. She's so modest that it's getting sugary. Well, don't get married then, said her mother to Kevin. Nobody's forcing you. Yeah, replied the guy, but what will people in town say? That Kevin Rifkin doesn't keep his word. No, she must cancel the wedding herself. I've already hinted at her, but she's so naive she doesn't understand any hints. I've been late for dates and I've been rude, and I haven't paid for her in cafes. I made her quit her job, but to no avail. She left me no choice. I have to rip the love off my fiancé like a band-aid. It hurts, but it's quick. While Noelle was trying on her dress, sending them to the dry cleaner, and getting excited about the wedding, Kevin was preparing a trick to embarrass his former love, which would make his bride a laughingstock. The day before the wedding, Kevin called Noelle. Honey, let's meet tomorrow at the registry office, suggested the groom. We'll save time and avoid the traffic jams getting to your house. Okay, Noelle agreed, not sensing a catch. As you say, so it will be. I don't care as long as you're near. Finally, Noelle's long-awaited wedding day arrived. She trembled at the thought of soon becoming Kevin's wife. She fluttered around the house like a butterfly, unable to sit still while the hairdresser did her hair. But at last everything was ready. It's a strange trend these days. Brides get to the wedding by themselves. The world's gone crazy, marvelled the cab driver. Well, it's not a problem for me, Noelle said to the cab driver. We'll meet the groom right at the registry office. It's more convenient for him. Still strange, muttered the man. I've been a driver at many weddings, and the grooms have always been next to the brides. While Noelle was arguing with the cab driver, Noelle's father was looking at an old photograph of his deceased wife. Well, darling, I'm giving away our daughter in marriage. She's all grown up now, as you see. I am staying at home. Don't ask, the groom's parents didn't want to see me at their rich feast. They said I'd embarrass the guests, but I know those guests. They're not embarrassed to steal on a huge scale from the people in the state. But when they see an ex-cop, they're scared to death. They are embarrassed to see us, ordinary people in their circle. I wish I knew how you are there, my dear. When Noelle arrived at the wedding, she found that all the guests had already gathered at the door of the ceremonial hall. They were very surprised that the bride had entered alone and unaccompanied, but the maid of honour explained to the others that this was the agreement with the groom. Some of the women shook their heads reproachfully. The men looked at each other, many of them not understanding the strange behaviour of the young people. The ceremony was about to begin, and Kevin was still absent. Noelle called him, but his phone was unavailable. She started to panic, and her friend tried to calm her down. She said that maybe the groom's motorcade was stuck in traffic. However, Noelle didn't believe it anymore, and she wanted to cry. Kevin's father and mother sat nonchalantly in the chairs, drinking champagne and calmly observing the general turmoil. "Where's Kevin? Maybe you managed to reach him?" the bride asked the groom's parents worriedly. "It's you who should know, honey. Where your future husband is, don't ask us, please," Kevin's mother replied arrogantly. "Why didn't you come here together? By the way, my son said that you were out of sorts yesterday. Is that so?" "Not at all," exclaimed the bride. "He himself suggested we meet here, just before the ceremony. I don't understand what's going on. I thought maybe you knew." Kevin's mother said nothing and turned away, and not wanting to see Noelle's tears, she continued her conversation with her equally pompous friend. Kevin and his friends didn't show up at the wedding in the next hour. The guests slowly began to disperse, bewildered and indignant that they were invited to a wedding but made to wait. Many were offended, considering it disrespectful to them. The poor bride was left in shock, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Among the guests, rumours began to spread that Noelle was to blame for it all. Supposedly, she had caused the groom to have a breakdown, which was why he did not come. No matter how much she tried to refute this false assumption, no one believed her. People preferred to side with the rich and powerful, rather than with a poor girl whose own father did not even attend her wedding. Of course, the gossipers did not know that the bride's father had been forbidden from attending the wedding. Noelle left the wedding the last. Her friends supported her in any way they could, but the girl was inconsolable. She cried the entire way home and arrived with a face swollen from tears and smeared makeup. When her father saw her in that state, he was shocked. "What's wrong? Why are you crying? And why did you come back here? Did you and Kevin have a fight?" "No, I didn't quarrel with anyone. I only made a fool of myself," Noelle said through sobs. "Kevin didn't come to the wedding. His parents made it look like it was my fault. I drove their sonny to madness, and he refused to marry me. I've never been so humiliated. But how could he do that to me? He set me up. And why? I didn't do anything wrong. How am I supposed to live? I resigned from my job, thinking I'll work with him in their company. It turns out now that nothing will happen. No wedding, no husband, no job, no happiness." "I won't let him get away with this," screamed her father. "He will pay for everything, and so will his family. How dare they hurt and humiliate a girl in front of everyone? I think he just changed his mind about getting married and was afraid to tell the truth, like all mama's boys. I've never liked him, and his parents probably knew his plan very well. That's why they were so calm." Noelle's father was furious. He had swallowed the offence that they had inflicted on him when they told him not to come to the wedding, but he would not allow anyone to harm their own child. The man began to pick his best suit, shirt and tie and to polish his shoes. Noelle noticed that and blocked his way. "Dad, you're not going anywhere. What if they provoke you and you end up in jail again? How will I manage without you? I can't bear it a second time." The man looked at his daughter and saw that she could barely stand on her feet from excitement and grief, and he did what any loving father would do in such a situation. He gave in. "Then," the man said, "we're going to make a delicious lunch. Remember how once you and I burned everything in the oven? Let's try better this time, because I'm hungry. I haven't had a dewdrop in my mouth all day." Noelle smiled through her tears and nodded her head. She realized that there would be no one in the world more dear to her than her father. Noelle knew that her father was trying to distract her somehow, so she agreed to the proposal. During the evening they cooked so many delicious things that they had to eat them for the 3 whole days, and even call Noelle's friends for help. The girls brought her the latest news about Kevin and his family. The former fiancé had already found a new girlfriend, a long-legged beauty from a modelling agency, which left and right to siphon off his money completely unashamed. And Kevin's parents flew on vacation abroad, the very place where the newlyweds wanted to go after the wedding. Noelle was angry and grief-stricken at the same time. She was filled with resentment because she gave up almost everything for Kevin and spent almost a year of her life on him, all for nothing. While his daughter experienced the betrayal of her fiancé, Michael thought over a plan of revenge. Of course, no criminal act was intended. However, he had a plan to put the arrogant rich in their place. Once, Noelle's father was a businessman. Back then, everyone was spinning as best they could. And Michael, together with a friend, wanted to pull off one financial scam, after which they would become millionaires. But their plan failed. Noelle's father was arrested for financial crime and sent to a pre-trial detention center. The trial was demonstrative, so Michael was given the maximum, 10 years. Michael's friend had a sick wife in his care, so he took all the blame on himself, making his friend a witness in the case. For this, the companion swore that he would be more than willing to pay for the rescue. Unfortunately, a year later, his friend's wife died of illness. When Michael was already in prison, his fiancée, Noel's mother, told him that she was expecting his child. She was happy that she was pregnant, and Michael was upset because he knew perfectly well that he would not see the baby's first steps and would not hear him called Daddy. Then the bride reassured him that she would definitely wait for him. But fate ordered otherwise. Noel's mother died during childbirth, so the girl was given to an orphanage. Michael's friend, as he could, fought with bureaucrats for custody of the little girl, but since he was a widower, he was denied custody. Only 10 years later, the father took his daughter out of the orphanage. The companion, who managed to dodge justice, constantly visited Noel's father, and every time he said that he owed him for the rest of his life and that, if necessary, he would fulfill any wish. Michael always refused the offer. The business had brought him nothing but grief, and therefore he had no intention of having anything more to do with it. But now the man realized it was time to pay the bills, and he turned to his friend for help. Late in the evening, in the mansion that looked more like a castle than a family nest, the bell rang. "Hello, Bernard," said Noel's father to the receiver. "It's been a long time since I've called you. I need your help. Let's meet tomorrow and talk." "Glad to hear from you, Michael," said the owner of the mansion. "Good, I'll send a car for you." The next evening, a luxurious black limousine pulled up to an ordinary apartment building. At the same time, Michael came out of the entrance and got in. The driver carefully slammed the door behind him, and the car started gently and drove off in an unknown direction. The neighbours opened their mouths in amazement and then began to discuss that their neighbour might be a hidden millionaire. The car brought Michael to the bank doors, where his old friend Bernard was waiting for him. They warmly embraced each other and entered the building, surprising the employees, who had never seen their boss so happy or even smile at a person in jeans and a checkered shirt. Michael stood out among the black and white clad employees like a bright spot. Inside the office, a few cups of coffee and small appetizing sandwiches were waiting for them on the table. "Well, Michael," exclaimed the bank owner joyfully, "I'm glad you need me at last, and I'll help you in any situation, whatever it may be. Have some coffee, treat yourself, and tell me what happened." Michael refused treats as anger and resentment choked him. "What happened wasn't with me, Bernard, but with my daughter," Michael heard in a voice trembling with anger. "You know those Rifkins, the local nouveau riche?" "I know them, of course. They have 2 major companies, and we finance them and provide credit. They have just applied for a large loan yesterday. Tonight we'll gather the bank's board to decide on this matter. The sum is serious." "Well, their family insulted and mocked my daughter," Michael said. "She has already tasted a bitter fate. Her mother died and she lived in an orphanage. I was in jail. And now they decided to dump her at the wedding. Can you imagine how she's feeling now? Their spoiled son simply didn't show up at the wedding, while they were sipping champagne and watching my daughter suffer." "This shouldn't go unpunished," Bernard exclaimed. "What do you suggest?" "I suggest punishing the entire family, and since they love money so much, they should be deprived of it. You can refuse to give them credit, ask other banks to deny them any, even the smallest amount." "Of course I can. I'll ruin their reputation so much that even the investors they've been luring for the past year will leave. Thank God, I still have weight and influence among powerful people in the city. I'm not boasting, but everything will be as you want it to be." "Thank you. That's great," Michael exclaimed happily. "Let people know what unreliable partners they are. That they can't even sort out things within their own family, let alone with other people's money or business. You're right, a strong family is the main indicator. We should drink to that, and not just coffee. The friends left the office laughing, heading to the most expensive restaurant in the city, where they spent the whole evening reminiscing about their youth. The anger that had taken hold of Michael's heart released him. He was happy to see his friend and receive his help. Now his little girl would be avenged. While Noelle was searching for the strength to return to her old life and forget the betrayal of her fiancé, Kevin enjoyed the company of a capricious model who only begged for expensive gifts and took her wallet to trendy places. The young man rarely showed up at work, and that started to outrage the company's management. People wondered how someone could be a vice president of a large company and not delve into the business, completely unloading all the responsibilities onto other people. But Kevin Rifkin did not care about the feelings of any employees. He spent inconceivable money on entertainment, travel, and paying for the maintenance of his beauty and buddies. And the employees were told that there was no money for bonuses and salary increases due to some difficult economic situation in the world. Everyone understood that it was a blatant and arrogant lie, but they couldn't do anything about it, as they would be quickly dismissed. The employees endured it, silently hiding their offended eyes from their bosses. After all, many of them needed to support their families and pay for loans and mortgages. Not everyone was lucky enough to be born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and so everyone envied Kevin and quietly hated him for his luxurious life and carelessness. When Kevin's father received a response from the bank, he was shocked. The document stated that his loan was denied. Due to bad news, he suffered a stroke while on vacation. There was no talk of company leadership. He needed to fight the illness and regain his strength. However, his wife seemed more concerned about not being able to maintain their luxurious lifestyle than her husband's health. What now? I won't be able to buy the diamond necklace I ordered from the famous Swiss master, will I? I have been waiting a year for my turn, she lamented next to her sick husband. What will I tell my friends, that I'm poor? Let me sleep, Kevin's father weakly responded. You have a mess in your head. Call our son and tell him to take over the company. Meanwhile, the women's rich friends were aware of their financial problems and refused to meet with them. They were afraid that Mrs. Rifkin would ask for help and financial injections from their husbands. No one wanted to sink with them. By some sixth sense, the rich friends understood that something was wrong here and that there was a hidden campaign against the Rifkins, so they were afraid to be in the same boat with them. Son, your father won't be able to lead the company. Now it's time for a real job. You have to keep the company afloat. Your father is having difficulty speaking, but the doctors promise that he will recover. Therefore, for all actions and decisions, you are responsible. Do what you want, but get the funds for development and employee salaries. Just don't tell anyone that we are in trouble. Kevin's mother called him from vacation. Maybe you'll become the boss yourself, said an unhappy Kevin. I have a party tomorrow. I paid for a famous band to sing for my girlfriend and friends. We can't cancel the celebration. Are you crazy? Exclaimed his mother. What band? We can't afford to pay people. No parties for now. Kevin, go to work. We gave you a good education and entrusted you with a high position. We'll be back soon, and I want to fix the situation by the time I arrive, otherwise you'll lose your inheritance. This threat immediately affected the young man, and he began calling his friends to cancel the party. The band will have to pay a penalty, but he wasn't going to tell his parents about it. When the beautiful girlfriend found out that Kevin had no more financial opportunities, she quickly found another source of money and easily jumped on it. However, she refused to return the money and precious gifts that Kevin had given her, despite all his requests. The girl said straight to Kevin's face that it was payment for the fact that she adorned an unremarkable wealthy son with her presence. Kevin was in shock. He wasn't used to refusals, much less such insulting statements. He remembered his Noelle, who was gentle and affectionate with him, and doubts crept into his heart that he had offended the only girl who sincerely loved him. He suddenly felt that everything that was happening to his family was divine retribution for the offense he had caused to an innocent person. He decided to call his ex-fiancée, but she blocked his number, and the young man realized that all the ways back were cut off. The young businessman needed to focus on the company, so the next morning he gathered the meeting to get a plan from top managers on how to get out of the debt pit and not let the company be sold off in parts. However, the disrespect and suppression of human opinion, which were practiced for years in the company by his father, now made themselves felt. Heads of departments and managers were afraid to express their opinions on the company's development, fearing that they might be fired, like some employees in the past. Kevin did not get any clear answers or proposals from his subordinates, whose eyes and even mannerisms were full of fear. And then the young man decided to act independently, relying on his limited knowledge of business. Only now did he realize that he was not worthy of this position, simply because he did not possess the necessary knowledge. This realization greatly oppressed him, and his worries found no support anywhere. He vented his anger on his parents, blaming them for raising him so lazy and stupid. "Do you hear what the owner's son said?" one director said to another. "He talked such nonsense that my eyes went dark." "Time to pack up and abandon this sinking ship," said the second executive. "At this rate, this financial genius will lead the company to bankruptcy. I feel sorry for the people who are hoping for these jobs." "All because he didn't study and learn from his father and deputies in his time," retorted the other person. "See how it all turned out. The father had a heart attack, and the son doesn't have the skills to manage such a big company. Now their golden days are over. I wish I could say that to his arrogant face." The experienced manager's prophecy came true quickly. Kevin Rifkin turned out to be not only a weak leader, but also a poor financier. Despite studying abroad, it was clear that he spent more time in bars than in university lecture halls. Soon, Kevin urgently needed money to cover the company's operating expenses, and the young president decided to take out loans from all the banks that his family had not yet applied to. "I want to talk to the owner of the bank," Kevin arrogantly said to the manager when he arrived at the credit department of one of the city's financial institutions. The manager went upstairs to deliver the message, and 10 minutes later he said that Kevin would have to wait at least an hour. Kevin was furious. He had never been made to wait for even 5 minutes, let alone an hour. But he couldn't do anything about it. An hour later, the secretary invited him upstairs. "Good evening, Mr. Rifkin," the bank's head greeted Kevin. "I understand that you want to apply for a huge loan at our bank." "Yes," the young man said discontentedly. "Do you know why I've been sitting here for over an hour? I would like to take out a credit at your bank. Let me sign where I need to and get the money." "You're impudent, young man," the banker replied seriously and frowned. "Your speech is unworthy of the vice president of a company. That's the first thing. And secondly, your credit has been refused." "But why?" exclaimed Kevin. "Unfortunately, your family has a bad credit history," the bank's head stated clearly. "You can't go to other banks. They will refuse you for the same reason. And now please leave the premises. I have a lot of work to do." Kevin was furious. He realized that there was some kind of conspiracy going on, but why? Had his father made a mistake somewhere and crossed paths with some influential person? 2 weeks later, Kevin had nothing left to pay his employees' salaries. People filed resignation letters and sued the company for non-payment of earned wages. The judge demanded that the company immediately pay off its debts to employees and creditors. Kevin and his mother had nothing left to do but sell the company at a bargain price, and they put the company's shares, which had fallen to a minimum, up for sale. As soon as they hit the market, someone bought them up wholesale. The money from the sale went straight into Kevin's account. Now it was time for him to look for a job himself. His mother, who had never worked anywhere before and had lived off her husband's money, was at a loss. She had no idea how ordinary people live. She cried for a long time, complained about her life, but no one felt sorry for her. Meanwhile, Kevin was very curious to know who had become the owner of their family company, and he was unpleasantly surprised when he arrived at the building's hall, where his luxurious office used to be, and the security guard did not let him in. "Not allowed," said the man sternly to the former owner, who had passed by him hundreds of times before. "The new owners ordered not to let you in." "How dare you!" Kevin shouted. "Just a week ago, everything here belonged to me." "What's done is done," came a voice from behind. "And don't you dare shout at my employees." Kevin turned around. Behind him were Michael Oliphant and his daughter Noelle. "Hello, Kevin," greeted Noelle, addressing her former fiancé. "What are you raging about?" "So it was you who took over my company?" he asked in a threatening tone. "Not taken over, but bought," corrected Michael. "I paid the price you set. It's your problem that you couldn't keep the company afloat when your father was sick. You should have been respectful of the business and the rest of the people too." "I get it," exclaimed the guy. "It was you who turned the banks against us. It's your fault they wouldn't give us a loan. To be fair, you're the reason the company went bankrupt. Your boorish attitude towards people, laziness and negligence caused it," parried Michael. "Stop blaming people for your mistakes," said Noelle. "So, Kevin, you will have to look for a job to support yourself and your parents. We can make you a gesture of goodwill and offer you a job as an ordinary manager. You, like the rest of your co-workers, could rise to a management position from the bottom, if you'd like to, of course." While they were chatting, Michael and his associates were approached by a secretary who used to work for Kevin's father. "Everyone is waiting for you at the board of directors. It starts in 5 minutes," the woman said, greeting Kevin as well. "Hello, Mr. Rifkin." When Kevin heard that people he considered beggars were called to the board of directors, where his father ruled, the unsuccessful businessman seemed to be furious. "Don't forget, you're talking to the owner's son," he shouted to the secretary, and then turned to Noelle. "How dare you insult me by offering the position of junior manager?" "You're the son of the former owner. Be correct, please," Noelle started answering, but unable to listen more, Kevin ran out of the hall. Tears of anger choked him as he was humiliated in front of the junior employees of the company. He couldn't understand how Michael Oliphant managed to acquire every single share of the company, or where he got the means to do so. But people like Kevin did not understand what real male friendship was. The money that Michael used to buy all the company's property was given to him by a friend who Noelle's father had once saved from prison. Furious, Kevin decided to win Noelle back, believing that if she forgave him, things would return to normal. When Kevin's anger became cold, the guy decided to get Noelle back. He knew that if she forgave him, things would go back to normal for him. "Hi, honey," Kevin said, calling Noelle's work number. "Do you still resent me? Why don't we go out and you forgive me? I miss you." "Hello, Kevin," the girl replied. "Of course I have forgiven you." but I won't go anywhere with you because I don't want to. Our love is already in the distant past, and you know it yourself. And you can come to work tomorrow. It's time to become an adult." Anger and rage consumed Kevin, but he did not give up the offered job. The next day, he began his duties as manager. Kevin knew how to wear a mask, so at work he maintained an indifferent look, but at home he was torn and furious. Unfortunately, his evil genius could not think of anything better than to take revenge on Noelle and her father. One late night, Kevin went to a bar on the outskirts of the city, where marginal personalities congregated. "Hello," he addressed the bartender. "Can you tell me who needs easy money here? I've got some work to do. I need to teach someone a lesson. I'll pay well." Kevin handed the bartender rolled up bills. "Hello," the bartender replied. "See that guy standing over there all tattooed? Go to him." Kevin left some bills to the bartender and went to the big guy. "Hi, I heard that you could do a job for me. I need to put someone in this place. I'll pay well." Kevin wrote on a napkin the amount he was prepared to pay for the order. "All right," agreed the bandit. "Name the place and time. Money up front." That same evening, Kevin's verdict was carried out. That evening, Noelle went home alone. As soon as she reached the middle, the path was blocked by a huge man. "Are you Noelle?" asked the man. "I am," said the surprised girl. "Why?" But she had no time to get an answer to the question, because it was immediately followed by a blow to her stomach. The girl screamed and fell down. She began to call for help, but there was not a soul around. She tried to run, managed to get up somehow, but the stranger grabbed her hair from behind and pushed her. In the man's hands was an iron rod. Noelle thought her life was over until someone hit the attacker on the head from behind. The man fell down. "Can you get up? Lean on me and let's go faster. He'll wake up soon," a male voice was heard. "Who are you?" "Just a passerby. I heard someone screaming, so I decided to help." Noelle calmed down and decided to look at her saviour. He was a young man, about 25 years old. His clothes were quite worn, but clean and tidy. It was obvious that the guy wasn't wealthy. "Where do you live?" he asked. "2 stops from here," Noelle replied. "That's a bit far. Shall we go to my place and get your abrasions treated?" "What's your name?" she asked. "I'm Noelle. You are?" "Will," he replied. When they reached Will's house, Noelle stopped at the entrance. It was hard to call it a house, more like a hovel. When they entered, Noelle found that inside everything looked not so bad. A girl about 10 years old came out of a small room. "Meet," said Will. "This is my niece, Molly, and this is Noelle. She was almost killed just now." Molly gasped in shock. "There are a lot of psychos around," said Noelle. Molly quickly set the table, and soon scones, cheese, and strong tea appeared before them. "Eat," said the girl. "You need to regain your strength, and then we'll take you home." It was very pleasant and warm for Noelle to be their guest. 2 hours later, they arrived at Noelle's apartment. The father was worried because he couldn't reach his daughter. When he found out what had happened, he was shocked and truly grateful to Will. But at the same time, he couldn't stop staring at Will's face. He looked very familiar. There was only one person with an identical appearance: his friend in the colony, who had protected Michael from the other prisoners by covering him with himself. The friend was killed by a self-made knife. "Wasn't your father's name Ivan?" "Yeah, Ivan," Will answered in surprise. "How did you guess?" Michael sighed. "Ivan was my friend and died for me. So now you are like a son to me. Stay with Molly at our place." The young man was pleased that someone knew his father and offered him help. He told his new friends that the apartment had been taken away from them by black realtors. Then he found an empty old house and started living there. And later, disaster struck. His sister and her husband died in a car accident. Their daughter Molly became an orphan, and Will had to take her in. His dead sister had a friend who helped Will formalize guardianship over the girl. That was Molly and Will's sad life story. The next day, Michael invited Will to work for his company. Seeing that Noelle was unharmed, Kevin got furious. In addition, he was angry that some vagrant from the street took the prestigious position of a PR manager. After another hour, the security service reported to Michael exactly who had organized the attempt. "Get out," Michael shouted at Kevin, "and I advise you to go to the police with a heartfelt confession." Kevin went home like a beaten dog, and there he was met by his sick father and furious mother, who shouted and scolded her loser son. Having received a suspended sentence, Kevin, like all weak-spirited people, started drinking himself black. When the stock of money ran out, he began to sell valuable things from the house, and the funds received were used to drink. Soon, the Rifkin's family was completely forgotten, and Will and Noelle announced the wedding. The wedding was held with a bang. Colleagues and family friends were invited, and 3 months later, Noelle said that Michael would soon become the grandfather of a grandson.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias.
Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sara tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sara y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sara quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sara completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sara se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sara quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber. Los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, Pren, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre Pren antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes. Te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Thyssen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Thyssen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al séptimo piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche. Me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado. Dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones. Intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre. Aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente. Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales. 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco. Parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas. Había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos. Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento, se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche. No había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta. Los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse. No hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Oh, ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marshall no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sara. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sara era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sara, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sara. Sherry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sara se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Serry. Serry alquilaba una habitación de Sara. Cada centavo que Sara ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Serry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sara no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Serry explicó que Sara estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Serry dijo que Sara no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sara hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Serry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foot resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.